prepared for you today is a review of Yule, the celebration, the pre-Christian celebration before Christmas. And I'm going to discuss basically 4 points here with 2 larger points and 2 shorter points. So the first thing I'm going to be discussing is the calendar problem, because we often hear about Yule being a solstice celebration. That is, however, an outdated interpretation, and I'm going to explain why and delve a little bit deeper into the calendar of the Old Norse and medieval times. Then I'm going to be talking about the social and cultural dimensions of the feast, and here I will be using a lot of material from the sagas, from the Icelandic sagas. And the last 2 points include the problem of Santa Claus being somehow assimilated with Odin, which is also a little bit of a myth. And then I'm going to show you why Icelandic Christmas is very original. So, by the problem of Yule and when Yule was celebrated, we should look a little bit into the way the Norse organized time. And sorry about that. Okay. And for that, I'm going to be using probably the best book written on this topic. It's a book written by Andreas Norberg, who actually researched quite a bit in calendars in ancient Scandinavia and medieval Scandinavia, Iceland, Sweden, and so on. So there appear to be remnants of an old way of measuring months according to the path of the moon in the sky, and this was also used in the 1900s, so a very long time. If you look at the calendars in central Sweden, for example, you have names of lunar months which varied, but 2 names seem to pop up every once in a while. These moons are called the Juletungel and Distungel. Tungel is actually an old Icelandic word meaning moon. And related to these months, we have meetings or markets held, for example, in old Uppsala in late winter or spring. So the rule was that the Disting market, for example, was to be held at the time of the Distingstungel full moon, which was the full moon after the first new moon following Epiphany. And this is also mentioned in sources preserved from the mid-16th century, but it's usually considered that this way of counting time based on these moons and on these celebrations is actually of a much more ancient date, or at least medieval date. So the Yule Tungel, for example, is mentioned as early as the 13th century in Icelandic sources, where it is referred to as Jólatungel, and at the same time it's also found in the other Scandinavian countries as well as Finland. So throughout the Nordic region, it was stated that the Yule Tungel was the moon that shined at Epiphany. Now, it is likely that the relationship between the Yule Tungel and Epiphany originated in a pan-Nordic, pan-Scandinavian rule from the early Christian period, from the time when Epiphany started being a very important date, a starting point for calculating the Easter cycle as well. But on the other hand, the Yule celebrations and the Disting and its market originate most probably in pre-Christian tradition. The Disting, by the way, most probably is identified with the celebration known as the Disablot by the old calendric rule. Yeah, so we also have some names, interesting names of months. For example, Ilir and Jólmánuður. These are months related to Christmas and to the winter solstice, and they were organized so that the winter solstice actually took place at the shift from one to another. So yeah, you basically had 2 months referring to Christmas time. And this is something that you interestingly also find in older sources. For example, the Venerable Bede, we're talking about how the Anglo-Saxons organized their year. He also speaks of 2 months by the name of Yuli. So that's obviously Yule or the Yule months. And this pair of months is mentioned in a few centuries later in other English sources as well. And even more interesting than this, we have a mention in the 300s, so a very long time ago, this time in Gothic sources, where you can find the term Fruma Iuleis, which was the month before the Yule month. So it's likely that all of these names of months originally refer to lunar months. Okay, so both of these lunar months, the Yule Tungal and Distinct Tungal, are probably remnants of a pre-Christian calendar that lived on in part of Christian times. So when the church followed the calendric system known as the Julian calendar, the one introduced by Julius Caesar, supposedly following the astronomical solar year entirely. In fact, it was somehow longer than the solar year, and it amounted to a difference of 24 hours in 128 years. And this difference was corrected in the 16th century with the introduction of the Gregorian calendar. But the thing is that when the Julian calendar was introduced into the Nordic countries in the mid 12th century, the calendar had shifted by about 7 days in relation to the astronomical solar year. And this means the dates given in today's Gregorian calendar actually refer to days to 7 days earlier in the Julian calendar. Apart from this complicated material I just presented, the Nordic division of year seems to have also been into quarters. And this was some kind of a week year, if you want. And the oldest evidence of this way of counting weeks is from Icelandic sources dating back to the 10th, 11th century, actually. The system is also mentioned in Sweden, but Nordic tells us here that the evidence is just from the 17th century. And there is also non-Icelandic evidence for this type of year. So the week year, apparently the Sami tended to use the same calendric traditions. So this was a way to combine, an attempt to combine the solar year and the week year. And it was done in medieval Iceland by periodically adding an intercalary week according to the rules that follow the ecclesiastical system. In other areas, the problem seemed to have been solved by not calculating one day. So what the Nordic evidence of the week year seems to indicate is that there were two parallel systems for dividing the year into 4 quarters. In regions like the Bjotaland region and the Sami regions, the quarters followed the Julian calendar dates for the solstices and equinoxes, which were in astronomical terms at the time incorrectly fixed. For example, with the winter solstice fixed at in December, but on the 25th, and so on. This quarterly division was based on a continental tradition that actually emerged in some other parts of Europe, in France in the 8th century, for example. But all Nordic countries also contained remnants of another way of dividing up the year, which was most likely pre-Christian and also quite unique to this part of the world. So this division into quarters, you find references to it in folklore, in sagas, in provincial laws, and so on and so forth. But it's not really that directly stated somewhere. And this is probably in part due to the fact that the start of each quarter was initially calculated as a 3-day period, and eventually this was normalized to a single day period. And it would have been kind of like variable, like the original 3-day periods expressed with West Nordic names would have been something like the winter nights, which were celebrated in October between the 13th and 15th of October, or the midwinter night, which will interest us a little later, between the 12th and the 14th of January. So it was a system of lunar months in which the fixed dates at around the middle of the Julian months corresponded with the date for the full moon in the middle of a lunar month. there arises the question of whether these dates were indeed so movable, and this seems unlikely because these were not just dates on a calendar or celebrations, they were also judicial periods. So, for example, periods where the thing would gather, and this suggests that they were somehow fixed in the solar year as well. Right. So, to cut a long story short, we have the first days of the quarters often linked to the week year, which was first and foremost solar, and the indication is that the system was actually pre Christian. So, if you want to make the calculations, if the Julian dates for the first day of each quarter are expressed in the Gregorian calendar, you can see here these results. I repeat, presented by researcher Andreas Norberg in his book about calculating times in the Old Norse period. So, yeah, we can therefore presume that the pre-Christian Nordic quarters started 4 weeks after the dates that were assumed to be the astronomically correct solstices and equinoxes. Yet another calendar system appears to have coexisted along the week year in pre-Christian times, and this was based on a combination of the sun's and moon's movements in the sky, therefore the lunisolar calendar. And this type of time reckoning was also typical for the Nordic world, was calculated in accordance with the phases of the moon, most likely from one new moon to the next, and a normal year would comprise 12 lunar months, but seeing that a lunar month only lasted for 29.5 days, we have 12 lunar months amounting to 354 days, which meant that there was a 11-day shift of the lunar year in relation to the solar year, which is why you had to compensate for that with a 13th month, which was introduced about once every 3 years. So you have here, for example, in this context, interesting mentions of months with the names. Two of them I mentioned before, Ilir and Yule Mánuður, and you also have Thori and Goi. The meanings of these months are a little bit unclear, but they do seem to have designated lunar months and not solar ones. The importance of the moon in this system of measuring, tracking time, you can also find evidence in several mythological poems. You have, for example, Alvismol, which is an old poem belonging to the poetic Edda, where you find the moon being presented as the one who tells ears, so the Aurtali. And you also find the designation Ni och Nith, which is waxing and waning moon. You also find references to the moon being used in calendars in a lot of sagas and provincial laws. So this is a suggestion of the fact that there was a calendar based on the cycles of the moon and of the sun. And again, interestingly, we can corroborate this with what Bede used to say about the varying lunar year incorporated into the solar one by relating two lunar months, the Yule, to the winter solstice. And he also mentions 2 months actually linked to the summer solstice. So he mentions, for example, that in a leap year, when a 13th moon month was added, this was named Litha and was inserted at about the time of the summer solstice. So this similarity kind of points to the direction that there would have been some kind of, let's say, old Germanic tradition in the luni-solar direction. So what we can conclude from this is that the first Yule month should always cover the winter solstice, so that the second Yule lunar month always started with the first new moon after this day. And if the new moon of the second Yule lunar month emerged 11 days or less after the winter solstice, there would have been a 13th lunar month to be inserted in the same year, because the second month of the following year would otherwise start before the winter solstice. And most likely the intercalation of this 13th lunar month would take place at the time of the summer solstice. Right. So why are we discussing all these things about the moon and full moon, new moon, and so on and so forth? Well, they were very important for organizing festivals. So you find a lot of references in literature. You find references to Disablot, for example, which seems to have been the most documented of these festivals, and the relationship to this cycle of the moon. This was the festivals held in the celebration of the Disir, which were allegedly feminine deities, and the feast might have occurred actually at the beginning of the so-called natural year, so the winter half of the year in the Norse world. And this would have been relevant, like I said before, because in such periods with the new moon or full moon, people also tended to organize markets and things. Of course, we also have the midsummer celebrations and the midwinter celebrations, but I must say about the midsummer celebrations, we actually have quite little material, unexpectedly little material, and it's well, what we can say is that they were linked; these festivals were linked to some kind of religious activities, but we can't really know for sure what these religious activities comprised. All right. In addition to all this stuff, there seems to have been a longer festival cycle with an 8-year interval that followed an astronomical 8-year lunar cycle. Sorry, and this is mentioned by several sources. For example, we have in the Ynglinga saga, which is the first saga of the cycle of the kings of Norway, written by Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century. We have here a mention of the sacrifice of the king Aun, who sacrificed 9 sons to Odin every 9th or 10th year. And other sources like Titmar of Merseburg or Adam of Bremen, they mention Blot, so festivities, sacrificial festivities in Leira, respectively Uppsala, also mentioning something similar happening every 9th year. Now, every 9th year seems to be an inclusive expression in the sense that the 9th day is already the first day in the other cycle. So you can compare it, for example, with myths such as Odin's ring, Draupnir, from which 8 new rings drip every 9th night. So this 9th night might have had some kind of magical connotations, like perhaps everything that you performed during the celebrations came to life or came to reality in this 9th day, or in the 9th year, if you're referring to the 8-year cycle. Okay, so this regulation, according to the full moons, was important because it had a cosmological dimension, and you are also frequently going to find in the sagas a formula which is Til Árs og Friðar, for good year and peace. So Ár is not only year, it also means like a prosperous year, a year of harvest. So like, yeah, a good year, the year's crops. So it had to do a lot with this idea of cosmological creation, like in ritual terms. So what we can conclude from the sources, because, for example, Adam of Bremen reports that the major gathering in Uppsala took place over 9 days, but according to Snorri, the distinct market only lasted 7 days. They could have organized themselves with a potential market lasting 7 days, because celebrations, like religious celebrations, tended to be organized at night. So there might have been this market lasting for 7 days, and then they also had to organize the Thing meeting days, which seem to have lasted like about 2 days, and then you had these 8 nights of religious ceremonies, major religious gatherings being held in the evenings and at night. Which brings us to the topic, which is Yule and the time when Yule was celebrated, the pre-Christian Yule. So there has been held for a long time this interpretation with the solstice, but now it is considered by most research old and outdated. People started wondering about it ever since the 16th and 17th century, and back then it was already assumed that Yule was celebrated during the night of the winter solstice, and this perception seems to have been kind of enforced or supported about a reference made by author Procopius in his account from the 6th century. But this account has a lot of problems because it's not very sure what peoples he referred to in his account, because he describes a feast with inhabitants in the northernmost regions of Scandinavia, a feast held for the returning sun about 20 days after the winter solstice. So whether he refers to some Scandinavian Germanic peoples or perhaps Finnic Sami people, that's really not certain. An exact information about the time of pre-Christian Yule, because we do have an exact information about this, is given by Snorri Sturluson, our author of the Prose Edda and of the Heimskringla, and probably other works as well. He says that the feast was celebrated at midwinter night. And this was a long time debated because the midwinter night did not occur until about after a month after the winter solstice, as already shown. So Yule seems to be linked somehow to the winter solstice, but also to the midwinter night, and it was in all likelihood celebrated in the time of the second lunar month's full moon. So this moon month started at the first new moon after the winter solstice. So therefore, we have an approximate date sometime between January the 5th and February the 2nd, and the midwinter nights corresponded to January the 19th to January the 21st in the Gregorian calendar. This is also corroborated by other authors, such as Tietmar of Merseburg, who also seems to mention the first moon after new moon following the solstice. Yule is not the only one having this problem of dating. The aforementioned Disablot in Uppsala has also been the subject of similar discussions, but I would not go into it right now. So, from all these calendaristic problems, we can conclude that the month Ilir always contained the solstice, and then the second month, most probably called Jolmánuður, contained the Yule moon, which occurs on the first moon following the new moon past the solstice. This had a logical explanation, which is to make sure that the months in the lunisolar calendar weren't spinning backwards, and the exception in the lunar calendar, where the winter solstice always marks the point where the first moon of Yule ends, so that the second Yule month starts with the next new moon. So it was a pretty practical decision to organize this celebration a month after the solstice, in order to combine both types of calendars, the lunar and the solar. Now, in the Norse world, people did know about solstices and equinoxes. We have a vocabulary for that, so I presume that if they did celebrate some big thing exactly at the solstice, they would have mentioned so. But as I tried to show here in this presentation, the calendar system was a little bit more complex than we tend to imagine. And what seems to be important here is that these celebrations seem to have been in January and not in December. And let's talk about the celebrations now. Now, there is a problem regarding the celebration, and this problem is actually not really specific only to Yule. It has to do with the fact that Christian authors, because Christian authors are the ones who, talk about these things in the Middle Ages, so beginning with the 12th, 13th century, they don't really insist on rituals and celebrations. They insist a lot on myths. They try to recuperate some old stories, but with regards to the exact ritual, they only do it in order to show that something was wrong, that something had to be Christianized, that people were too pagan, or to criticize something, or to talk about something strange. But other than that, it's not really clear what they were doing at these celebrations. In all likelihood, according to the sources that we have, there seemed to have been a lot of drinking, ceremonial drinking. So people consumed a lot of alcohol. There are even laws stating how much alcohol you had to consume. And then they started promising some stuff, making a promise. I don't know, going on a quest or gaining a land or gaining some kind of retinues. Yeah, some kind of promise to show how much power they had or they would have after performing these quests. And of course, it was also a great opportunity for chieftains and kings to show off and to show to their subjects that they deserved support, and it was also a great opportunity to maybe forge new alliances and so on and so forth. So yeah, well, drinking is a means of establishing and maintaining contact with the human, but also with the supernatural powers. And we notice from a lot of religious and magical rituals where liquid offerings are made to supernatural powers. Regarding the name Yule or Yol, with a long vowel in Old Norse, this is kind of uncertain. I'm not sure that if anyone really figured out where this term comes from. Actually, we have a first attempt to explain this term in the 13th century, so people started wondering about it a long time ago, in a work called Ágrip of Noregs konungasögu. This was kind of like a synopsis of the history of the Norwegian kings. And it says here that it is proper to solve the question which Christian men pose with what heathen men understood by Yule, because Yule has the origin in the birth of our Lord. And then the comparison starts with the heathen men organizing a banquet at which they honored Odin, and Odin is called by many names. He's called Vidrir, and he's called Hör, and Thridi, and among other things, Yolnir. And it is stated, so the author states that Yol was actually named after this name of Odin, which is Yoldir. It's kind of controversial because Odin had, I think, about 100 names. Neil Price made a full list of them and what they mean from all possible sources. So, yeah, I'm not very sure about that. But at any rate, this shows us that it is probable that in the 13th century, this is the way people, like Christian people, perceived Yule as a feast in honor of Odin. And ever since, a lot of etymologies have been proposed. For example, the root aulos, and meaning a larger type of cod, and also some kind of plant, maybe the angelica, related to this root owl. There was also an attempt to link it to the name Julius. There is really no agreement about the origin of the word. Some dictionaries state that the basic Germanic form is seen in a form such as Yeula, but what it means, yeah, we don't really know. So if anyone has an idea and is better at linguistics than I am, then please propose a theory about this name. All right, so I'm going to continue with a couple of sources where we can actually find something related to this event and what people used to do at this event. First and foremost, we have from Snorri the saga of Håkon the Good, which speaks of rescheduling Yule and stopping sacrifices because the king tried to convince everyone that it would have been a better idea to have like a unified celebrations. So let me just skip a little bit the Old Norse text, and I'm going to just tell you what it is about, broadly speaking. So it says here that there was an ancient custom for Sither when a sacrifice should take place that all farmers, so bönder, should come there where the temple was and bring with them provisions to consume while the feast lasted. And then the author starts complaining. Að veislu þeirri skildu alir menn öll eiga. Þar var og dreppin alls konar smali og svo hross, en blóð það allt, en þar kom af. Þó var kallað hlát og hlátbollar það, en blóð það stóð í, og kláteinar. Þar var svo gert sem stökklar, með því skildi rjóða stallana öll saman, og svo veggi hofsins utan og innan, og svo stökkva á mennina, en slóttur skildi sjóða til mannfagnaðar. So at that feast, all men should have ale. There were also slain all kinds of small cattle and horses, but all the blood that came from there was called hlaut, and the hlaut bowls, the bowls were in which the blood stood, and hlaut tains were made like sprinklers. And with these, one should sprinkle the altars altogether, and also the walls of the temple inside, and thus also splash on the people. Then the meat should be boiled for human enjoyment. Fires should be on the middle of the temple floor. There should also be kettles, and it should be fully loaded with firewood. But then he who made the feast and was chieftain, he should bless the sacrificial food. First, a toast to Odin's health, skildi fyrst Odin's. Then a toast to the victory and prosperity of the king, drekka til sigurs og ríkiskonungi sínum, and then a toast to Njord and Freyr for a good harvest and peace. Or Freyr or Freyr, depends on whether you want to pronounce it in an old way or in a modern way. Anyway, after that, says the text, it was common for many to drink a toast to Bragi, who was the god of poetry. People also drank to the health of their kinsmen who had been illustrious, and that was called a lesser libation. So what we have here is a reference to the sacrifices performed with the animals and the blood being sprinkled for prosperity, and the toasts held have a couple of names of deities here, and besides the deities, it was also important to toast for the king and for people who had done something important, for the community, illustrious kinsmen. Snorri also has some references to this in the saga of Olaf the Holy. And here it is about a district called Marin, which was a significant place back in the day, because it was, I think, among the last districts to be Christianized, and it was a lot of work to be done here in terms of compromising with the people in the area. So, for example, it says here that the king accused the farmers for having a midwinter sacrifice, at þeir hefði haft miðvetra blót. So again, midwinter, not the solstice. And then we have this farmer, Ölvir, who replied, saying that the farmers were mistaken in their accusation, and he stated that they actually had Christmas celebrations and gatherings throughout the district, and the farmers didn't intend to organize a Yule feast in such a way that it would lead to excessive revelry. And he goes on to say that people have been drinking for a long time, and Marin is a very significant gathering place with a large hall, and the surrounding area is densely populated, and it seems good for people there to drink together. Þykir mönnum þar til gleði gott að drekka mörgum saman. So again, celebration with alcohol, community building, if you want to. The king was not very pleased. He responded angrily, and he seemed rather stern, and he believed that he knew the truth better than what was being reported, and he ordered the farmers to go back home, stating that I will find out the true facts, and you will not escape my judgment, and whatever happened here, do not do it again. The farmers then went home, reported their journey, not without embellishments, and it was clear that the king was quite displeased. So it seems that people did tend to keep some of their old habits, but at the same time they were trying to make a compromise, in the sense that, okay, maybe at the surface we can have something more Christian, but please let us keep our pre-Christian beliefs as well. So it was a case of hybridization, if you want. Besides these two very important sources, which stem from Snorri, like I said, we have a lot in the sagas, but not a lot about what actually happened, like I said. So we have, for example, in Icelandic saga, um, some references about a guy named Gisur, for example, who invited many people to the Yule feast. So Fjöl meant Jolaboth, and then he invited his friends for the eighth day, and there was mead blending and the brewing of mungot, which seems to have been some kind of strong ale. And in the same saga, we also have a reference when, again, Gisur and some other guy, Jon, spent Christmas at the king's court, but they are said to have lodged at a great hall, a great gathering elsewhere, and then it happened that the king actually provided with drinks from the royal cellar. It's just mentioned that they were there with the king during Christmas, as usually the pages, the retinues did. So Skutilsveinar. So anything else is a bit uncertain what they were doing there. The same you can see in the saga of Njol, Brennu Njol saga. Um, After that, they fought north to see Earl Håkon, and he gave Gunnar a hearty welcome and bade him stay with him that winter. Gunnar took the offer, and every man thought of him a man of great worth. And at Yule, the Earl gave him a gold ring. So, speaking of gift giving, which is a very popular thing to do nowadays. There seemed to have been a tradition in that direction as well, but in ancient and medieval societies, gift giving was the giving of an obligation, as a matter of fact. So it wasn't just a recognition; it was also an obligation. And sometimes at these celebrations, we do have references of important people such as earls, jarls, offering some kind of thing like a ring in this case, to show gratitude, but also to ensure loyalty. And then the saga of Njol, which also speaks a lot about the Christianization, um, says at some point that this heathendom was done all away within a few years' space, so that those things were not allowed to be done either by stealth or openly. So the reference is here to the pagan customs. Yeah, Thorgeir uttered the law as to keeping the Lord's Day and fast days, Yuletide and Easter, and all the great high days and holidays. So it is here a point where we can say, okay, Christmas and Yule tended to blend in this one holiday. Other sagas where we find references to Yule are, for example, the saga of Erik the Red, Erik Saga Rauda, which mentions the preparation made for the Yule feast, and that it was magnificent, and that they had scarcely ever seen so grand a feast. And after Yule, there seemed to have been a marriage. The subject of a marriage with a girl named Gudrid was brought into question, and the Yule feast was prolonged and turned into a larger feast, a marriage feast. What else I found? I've also found some references in Finnboga Saga Rama, again with some gift giving, I think. So yeah, Finnbogi thanked the Jarl warmly, and all the men were greatly pleased by this. And they said that in 17 winters they had not been such an exchange as this, and it was a reference to the holiday at any way. And the Jarl seems to favor him at Yule, and he becomes a retainer. And no one with the Jarl had a greater success than Finnbogi. Yeah. So again, Christmas, Yule seen as a chance to exchange loyalties, or maybe shape new loyalties, gain supporters, or offer your services to a lord. Um, These were just a couple of examples. You can also find similar stuff in the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson. You can also find examples in Erbygja saga. Here there was something interesting. Yeah, that winter at Yuletide, Thorolf had a great drinking and put the drink round briskly to his thralls. And when they were drunk, he egged them on to go up to Ulvarfell and burn Ulvar in his house and promised to give him their freedom afterwards. So it was also an occasion to express your violence one way or another. What I found most interesting was something in a saga which is not really that well known. You can find it in the edition translated by Herman Poulsen, edited by Herman Poulsen from 1985. It's called Seven Viking Romances. The reference is actually to legendary sagas. And in one of these legendary sagas, called the Bosa Saga of Herauds, it says here that Yule was celebrated in the following fashion. So here we actually have some references to what people were doing, and not only to the significance of the celebrations. So it says here, for example, that a memorial cup was consecrated to Thor, which was carried into the hall, and everything began to move. Lots of people jumped from their seats, danced on the floor. This went on for some time. After that, it was time for Odin's toast to be drunk. And then Sigurd opened the harp, so there was chanting and singing, dancing, quite nice. This harp was heavily inlaid in gold and so big that a man could stand upright inside it. And then they played something called coif thrower. So all the coifs were blown off the ladies, and they danced above the cross beams in the hall. And when Odin's toast had been drunk, there was only one more left: the toast to Froya. So this was pretty interesting in terms of at least what people in the Middle Ages imagined people did like centuries before. Maybe some of these celebrations were actually kept, because we already saw in the examples of Snorri that there were some kings, some later kings, who really had a problem with the fact that these celebrations just continued in the pagan way. Another reference is from Forstbreiðar Saga. This is a reference highly illustrative of how holding a feast could actually increase your power and your reputation. We are told that Thorkel hosts a feast for all his friends in Greenland. However, his purpose is not only to provide entertainment, but also to ensure glory for himself. And for this, he brews this Mungaf thing I mentioned before, this strong ale. And what is interesting here is that he doesn't really just want to offer alcohol. This wouldn't be enough to increase his fame. He also has to provide the right setting, but then the problem seems that he doesn't really have these implements of display, so he actually borrows it. So he borrows furniture, tapestries, and goblets from some friends, and he gives them back. But with them he's able to organize this very big celebration in order to increase his fame. All right, and speaking of Drekajol, which is something you will going to find is something very common in the saga. So to drink Christmas, it sounds a bit bizarre, but you can also find it in reference to other terms. For example, to drink a wedding or to drink a funeral. This is not really in the, or it is also in the practical sense of drinking alcohol consumption, but it seems that at least in the mentality of the Viking Age and of medieval Scandinavia, the act of drinking was related to an act of celebrating. So Dreka Jol or Dreka Jol actually meant to celebrate Christmas. And you celebrated it with a lot of drinking games in which men were supposed to display their prowess by making vows. And these vows had to be kept. They were kind of like magically binding contracts, and this combination was an explosive one between drunkenness and boasting, and also an effective tool to conquer an enemy. But making this kind of vow, on the other hand, could turn out very good for the character. He could actually become very glorious because he was compelled to go on this quest, or yeah, do whatever it is he wanted to perform. But it could also turn to the worst if um, things didn't go out as he planned. But at any rate, Yule feast also meant vows and vow swearing. And we have an example about this in Harðarsaga og Honverja, for example, when during a Yule feast, a group of men make a series of vows in the following fashion. So we have Hroar, for example, here as the main character, standing up and saying, "Here I step on the trunk and make this vow. I shall have broken into Sorti, the Viking burial's mount, before the next Yule." He plans to defeat an undead or a mound dweller, a hugboar. I talked about this in my previous lecture about the Norse undead. If you want to know the whole story, just go to that lecture. And this promise creates a chain reaction of men who, yeah, each in their own turn wanted to prove themselves as worthy as Hroar, and they made similar vows, sometimes not without questioning why they actually did that. So there is a guy who, for example, asks if it is indeed proper to follow this tradition, but then he goes on to say that I also make this vow, but I will go to you to you at with you at Soti's burial mound, but I am my own master, so I will not bow to you, and I will not be gone before you. So you're going to die before me. Take that as a promise. All right. So we have vows to increase power, not to recognize anyone as the superior of the group of men, and this was very common. This whole ideology of a vow making drinking game, which was part of the larger ideology of proving your manliness. There is also a myth about Thor when he gets involved in a series of games, of magical games with the Jotun, the giant Utgardaloki, and he's considered to be a great drinking man, Drekjumaður. So it was really a compliment if you could drink a lot and then be able to prove yourself despite or with all the drinking, and so on. So promising to undertake deeds that would prove you worthier than other men. And speaking about tragedies and vow swearing, we have an older poem called Helga Kviða Hjörvarssonar. This is part of the heroic cycle of the Poetic Edda, and it's a very interesting poem here because we have an example of a vow where somebody actually gets killed because of it. So the poem tells about King Helgi, who was a great warrior, and Helgi has a wife who is Svoa. And she is a Valkyria, and Helgi has a half brother Hedin who one day meets a giant woman one winter evening because they were about to celebrate Yule. He meets a giant woman riding a wolf and using snakes as reins, a troll woman, and she offers to accompany Hedin, and he says no, and then she places a curse upon him. And that evening there was the Yule feast, and oaths were sworn on a boar, might have been the boar of Freyr, might have. And Hedin actually swore that he would take Suova, the daughter of King Eilimi, his brother Helgi's lover, as his own wife. But then he immediately regretted his oath. Then again, the oath was already spoken. So if the oath was already spoken, then you had to go on with it. It was binding. But Helgi doesn't really seem that concerned about it because he says that Hedin should not concern himself because these oaths tend to become true after a while. They always prove to be true. And at any rate, Helgi was aware of the fact that at some point he will have to fight someone. And in case he dies, it would have been a better idea for his own brother to go on and take care of Suova than leave her in the hands of another man. But at any rate, this course of events actually ends up with Helgi getting killed, so that Hedin can actually fulfill his oath one way or another. All right, now towards the end of the presentation, let's address the elephant in the room. Um, I try to present to you what we can find out from the sources about both when the celebration was held and what people actually did at the celebration. There has been, in the course of time, a tendency to like overinterpret the sources. So you're going to find a lot of myths regarding, for example, the Christmas tree invented by Germanic peoples, which was, yeah, it's nothing more than an invention. And one of these myths which just seem to live on and not die out is the connection between Odin and Santa Claus, because I mentioned before previously in multiple occasions that during the Yuletide celebrations there was a toast in the name of Odin, and based on that fact, or mention, part of the celebration, some people have come to the conclusion that because Santa is related to Christmas and Odin is related to Yule, that they might have been somehow connected to each other. That's not really the case, because the history tells us something very, very different, which is the fact that Santa Claus most likely is based on Saint Nicholas. It's a rebranding of Saint Nicholas, Nikolaus of Myra. And by the 15th century, this cult of Saint Nicholas had spread all over Western Europe. And he was widely known, as a matter of fact, as a bringer of secret gifts. There were also some legends in the 9th century about him secretly bringing the sacks of gold to a poor man to pay his daughter's dowries, among many other legends circulating about Saint Nicholas. And Odin and Santa Claus actually have nothing in common in terms of their respective iconographies either. um, Saint Nicholas, if you look at the way he's represented in the course of time, you're going to see that he is actually bishop. Yeah, he's dressed as a bishop in a very Byzantine way. And Odin, on the other hand, he has a spear and the eight-legged horse and the one eye, and he's also a too much of a violent god, so that he can serve as an example for somebody as generous as Saint Nicholas. It is true, however, that in old poetry you will find Odin as the bringer of Yule, the Yule, Jolnir, for example, in a poem called Holegatal. However, this doesn't really prove anything. So, like I said, they really have very little in common. And you should remember that one of Odin's primary goals throughout Norse mythology is to cause as many people to die, because he wants brave men to die violent deaths, so that he can be able to harvest them and then send them to Valhall, to the Hall of the Slain, where they will train perpetually in order to help him for the upcoming apocalypse, for the days of Ragnarok. So when Odin gives you a gift, something like a weapon, it's usually a sign of him wanting you to die. So, for example, in the saga of the Volsungs, Odin gives a magic sword that can cut through rock to the hero Sigmund, and Sigmund uses the sword to kill as many enemies as possible. But when Sigmund grows older, Odin decides it's time for him to go to Valhall. And one day, as Sigmund is heading into battle, he sees an old man with one eye, dressed in grey, wearing a wide brimmed hat, carrying a spear. And this man is obviously Odin. And Sigmund swings the sword given to him by Odin against Odin's spear, but then the sword shatters and Sigmund is disarmed, and then he can go to Valhall with Odin. So these characters really don't have anything in common. Odin is never depicted as somebody wearing red, for example, and yeah, if you look at the visual depictions of the modern folkloric figure of Santa Claus, you're going to find that the origins lie elsewhere. So, for example, you have the best known description of Santa Claus coming from the poem A Visit from Saint Nicholas, the poem better known today by the title On the Night Before Christmas. And the modern image of Santa Claus was further canonized by all kinds of cartoons and poems and stories, most of them from the 19th century or the early 20th century. And speaking about Santa, Yeah, speaking about Santa, modern Iceland doesn't really have Santa. It has something much more interesting and much more fun. And these are the Yule lads, which are actually the Christmas trolls. And they had a very, very violent image. I suspect that it had a lot to do with the harsh climate and weather conditions in Iceland, and the all the hardships people had to endure. So they invented all these trolls they had to protect themselves from. But nowadays, their image is highly sanitized, and rather than being depicted as trolls defined by extreme deformities, they wear these traditional red and white clothes, and they're very fluffy and smiley and so on. And they're no longer pulling pranks, but they just leave presents in the shoes. And the worst thing that can happen nowadays is that you find a potato in your shoe in the morning, and that's it. Now, the National Museum of Iceland describes them as such. So it says that throughout the majority of the year, the twisted versions of Santa are thought by many to hide in the daunting lava fortress of Dimmuborgir. This is located in the north of Iceland, in the Mývatn area, and others believe that they simply live in an unidentified mountainous area. At any rate, they come from the 11th of December to the 24th of December, and a lot of them appear in all kinds of folk tales and stories. We have a poem about the Yule lads, which appeared in the book Christmas is Coming, Jól in Koma, by Jóhannes Kötlum in 1932, which served to make their names better known. However, this idea of the Santa Clauses, the Yule lads, you can also find in older sources, for example, in the 17th century in the poem of Grilla. So we have sheep coat cloth, for example, trying to suckle ewes in farmers' sheep sheds. You have gullygawk stealing from buckets of cow milk. You have stubby stealing food from frying pans. The spoon licker, the pot scraper, the bowl licker, the door slammer, skyr gobbler eating up all the Icelandic yogurt, the sausage swiper stealing sausages, the window peeper creeping outside windows, sometimes stealing stuff as well, the door sniffer, the meat hook snatching up any meat left out, especially smoked lamb, or the candle beggar stealing candles used to be sought after in Iceland. And of course, they have parents. They have parents Grilla and Lepaludi, and the infamous Christmas cat you can find in Reykjavik, displayed. Characters with a lot of gruesome and cannibalistic features, but like I said, nowadays sanitized and used for fun. So it's very interesting to see this diversity of tradition, and it's also very interesting to think about how this evolved with the passage of time. And I think it's worth, especially with regard to Old Norse Yule celebration, it's worth going back to the sources to see exactly what people used to do. And I think that despite the differences, we tend to have a lot in common, although the significance, yeah, definitely changed. So we make New Year resolutions, for example, but it's not really magically binding. So I don't think anything bad will happen to you if you make a promise to yourself to read 60 books in a year, but you're not going to live up to it. You're not going to end up dead like Hedin's brother, for example. So it's well worth thinking about such traditions and what we can still find in terms of common ground nowadays. So from me, I wish you Glädjelig Jul, or Merry Christmas, Frohe Weihnachten, Crăciun Fericit in my own language, Romanian. And if you're interested in more aspects of Norse culture and the Viking Age, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thank you very much for this presentation and this opportunity. I hope you were able to find out new and interesting things to think about in terms of Norse culture.